Today's lesson is a useful but problematic gas. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And it's the second day that we're talking about a useful but problematic gas. We did mention that the mystery gas is methane. And we talked about methane being the main constituent, the main ingredient in natural gas. And we talked about the fact that natural gas has all sorts of advantages, didn't we, Helen?
Yes, it has all sorts of advantages over either coal or oil. First of all, it doesn't pollute the air as much because it doesn't emit as much pollution as the other fuels like oil or coal. And it's also very good for a number of usages. We can use it to cook with. We can use it to heat our homes, to power heavy machinery. And of course, it was first introduced as a form of fuel that you can cook with when people wanted to transition from wood-burning stoves to gas-burning ones instead of electric ones.
Indeed. And of course, natural gas does not pollute the air as much as oil or coal. So what's the problem with natural gas? What's the problem with methane? Well, we're going to find out today. So let's find out about some of the problems with natural gas and methane. Let's listen to the first part of today's lesson right now.
If it is released into the atmosphere before being burned, methane is an incredibly effective greenhouse gas. In the short term, it is around 80 times as effective as carbon dioxide at trapping heat. Currently, annual global methane emissions stand at around 570 million metric tons. And although a large amount of this is methane that has escaped during the extraction and transportation of natural gas, methane comes from other sources too.
各位好，第一部分我们看到单字 extraction， 这个字是名词，指开采或是萃取。例如 The extraction of petroleum has polluted the marine environment. 开采石油已经污染了海洋的环境。另外把字尾的 ion 去掉，就变成这个字的动词 extract， 表示萃取或是提取。像是 The team of scientists extracted DNA from the mummified mammoth. 科学家团队从那只长毛象干尸中萃取出 DNA。 或者 Doctors extracted venom from poisonous snakes to make anti-venom. 医生从毒蛇身上提取毒液制作抗蛇毒血清。
So we're talking about methane at the moment. It says here, if it is released into the atmosphere before being burned, methane is an incredibly effective greenhouse gas. So this sounds like a positive thing. It's an incredibly effective gas, but not really because we're talking about greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gas is gas that stops heat from escaping from the atmosphere. So that's not good because if heat is unable to escape from the atmosphere, that is heat that is produced from human activities such as factories or cooking or the activities that happen on farms, and this heat isn't able to escape from the atmosphere, then Earth's temperatures will rise, and that could be a component of climate change. So climate change is related to the release of greenhouse gases. And the reason why this gas is called a greenhouse gas is, well, we have to look at the meaning of greenhouse. A greenhouse traditionally is a building that's usually made of glass used for growing plants that need to be protected from the weather. So when you have very delicate plants or flowers, you put them in a greenhouse so they don't get blown away or they don't suffer from the extreme cold or the extreme heat. And here, these natural gases are functioning like a greenhouse that is keeping heat from escaping from the atmosphere.
Yeah, those greenhouses work pretty well. I remember going into greenhouses when I was a kid in the middle of winter, and it was as warm as toast inside those greenhouses. So indeed, a greenhouse, of course, brings in heat from outside and doesn't let it back out again. And the original term was the greenhouse effect. You still hear it, but most people talk about climate change or global warming. And of course, methane is an effective greenhouse gas. In the short term, it is around 80 times as effective as carbon dioxide at trapping heat. My goodness, so it sounds even more nasty or nastier than carbon dioxide. You think carbon dioxide is bad. Methane is even worse. It's 80 times as effective as carbon dioxide. So imagine if all the world's methane were released into the atmosphere, we'd all be dead by tomorrow.
Right. And of course, this is only true for the short term. It says here in the short term. So it's not specified exactly how long that is, but we might imagine that we're not talking about thousands of years or hundreds of years. We might be talking about a few years or a few decades. So this quality, this attribute of methane, it's only true for a short term, for a few years. Now, currently, annual global methane emissions stand at around 570 million metric tons. So here, the word annual, it means yearly. So you can talk, for instance, about someone's annual salary, which is the money that they receive every year for the job that they do. So annual global methane emissions stand at 570 million metric tons.
That sounds like a lot, but I suppose if you compare it to other gases and other things in the atmosphere, it might not be so bad, but still that seems like a pretty high figure. The emissions stand at around 570 million metric tons. So here we've got the verb phrase to stand at, which means that's where they are. That's where the statistics are at the moment. They may have been lower before. They may be higher in the future, but currently that's where they are. That's the current figure.
Yes, and here metric ton is a unit for measuring weight containing 1,000 kilograms.
And moving on now to the next sentence, it says, and although a large amount of this is methane that has escaped during the extraction and transportation of natural gas, methane comes from other sources too. So you might be wondering, where does all that methane come from, the 570 million metric tons of methane in the atmosphere? Well, it is true that a large amount of that methane does come from the extraction and transportation of natural gas. That is true. Humans make mistakes, so methane escapes into the atmosphere. But methane comes from other places too. It comes from other sources as well. So first of all, let's talk about extraction here. Of course, when you have natural gas in the world or under the ground, you need to extract it, you need to pull it out, and the verb extract is often used in dentistry. If you have a bad tooth and you need to have it pulled out, then the dentist will extract your tooth. So here we're extracting the methane from the ground, and some of it will leak into the atmosphere, and then it can escape during transportation. When you're taking the natural gas from one place to another, some of it will escape.
Right. And here, transportation refers to the process or the means, the things that you use to carry people or objects from one place to another. So trucks are used as a form of transportation for delivering goods. We can also talk about public transportation, which Taiwan is very famous for. Taipei, at least, has very good public transportation in the form of the MRT system.
And transportation is sometimes expressed as transport. They're both the same kind of word. And, of course, methane does come from other sources, which we'll get to as our lesson continues. So let's do that right now. Let's move on to the second part, and we'll listen first.
Livestock farming is one of the leading causes of methane emissions, with farm animals creating around 90 million metric tons of methane per year. Animals such as cows and sheep, which are raised for food, produce methane naturally in their guts as part of their digestive process. Another large source is food waste. The richest countries in the world throw away around 50% of their food. As this food breaks down, it can release significant amounts of methane.
二部分我们看到片语 break down， 意思是分解或是分成。例如 The soldiers broke down and cleaned their rifles. 士兵把步枪拆解开来清理。也可以说 Brenda broke down the volunteers into groups by age and gender. Brenda 依照年龄和性别把志工分组。另外补充其他两种 break down 的意思。第一种是指故障，停止运作。我们可以说 The scooter broke down shortly after leaving the mechanic. 这辆机车从修车技工那里离开不久后就抛锚了。或是 The car broke down and I had to walk for several kilometers to find help. 车子故障了，我必须走上好几公里寻求帮助。第二种意思是表示情绪崩溃。举例来说 The suspect finally broke down and confessed during interrogation. 那位嫌犯在审问中终于崩溃认罪了。或是 Wendy broke down at her grandmother's funeral. Wendy 在祖母的丧礼上情绪崩溃。
So we're talking about methane and where it comes from. We saw before that it can get lost when it is extracted or pulled from the ground. It can also get lost and escape into the air when it's being transported. But there is also another source of methane, another form of methane production. And it says here, livestock farming is one of the leading causes of methane emissions, with farm animals creating around 90 million metric tons of methane per year. So here the word livestock refers to animals such as cows, sheep, and pigs that are kept on farms. And collectively, together, they are called livestock. So livestock farming is actually a big cause of methane emissions, and they together create around 90 million metric tons of methane per year.
Exactly. And of course, livestock farming refers to raising cattle for production. You're going to slaughter them and make them into hamburgers and steaks and bacon and all that stuff. And of course, when the animals are hanging out in the farm, they're letting out gas in the best form possible. And that gas has a lot of methane in it, and it goes into the atmosphere. Animals such as cows and sheep, which are raised for food, produce methane naturally in their guts as part of their digestive process. So, of course, we're talking about cows or cattle. They're also referred to as cattle. And we've also got sheep as well, the ones with the wool. And they're raised for food, so you can get those lamb chops and stuff like that. And when you have them on a farm, they will produce methane naturally in their guts. Or even if you don't have them on a farm, if they're your pets, I suppose they'll still produce this gas anyway because it comes naturally from their guts, which refers to their digestive system, their stomach, but mainly their intestines.
Yep, so guts refer to the tube in your body that carries food from your stomach. And it's part of the digestive system. And it's also a part of the digestive process for these animals, these farm animals. Digestive here refers to the process of digestion or separating pieces of food into smaller parts. So, for instance, saliva, which is the liquid that's in your mouth, is part of the digestive system, even though most people don't think of it that way. They think of digestion as starting when the food is in the stomach, but actually your saliva already begins to break down the food in your mouth before you swallow it, so it's part of the digestive system.
Now, another large source is food waste. Okay, that's us here. This is the problem with humans here. We waste a lot of food. The richest countries in the world throw away around 50% of their food. So we don't eat half of the food that we've purchased or that we've ordered at a restaurant. We just throw it away. And then that food starts to rot. And as this food breaks down or as it rots, it can release significant amounts of methane. So there you go, folks. We're part to blame in this by wasting so much food. So, yeah, clean your plate and don't let food rot.
And here the phrase break down means to separate something into smaller parts. So, for instance, your digestive system breaks down food. But also when things break down, it just means that it becomes separated into its individual elements. So if you leave food out and you don't refrigerate it, it's going to break down. It's going to separate and eventually become moldy and smelly until it rots and turns into garbage.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. It's time to move on to the third part and talk about some good news regarding methane.
The good news is that while methane is a harmful greenhouse gas, it also dissipates fairly quickly, unlike carbon dioxide, which can stay in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. If we can reduce our methane emissions, we might just be able to stall the rapid warming of our planet. With a little breathing room, we can focus on finding effective solutions for our longer-term climate problems.
第三部分我们看到单字 dissipate， 这个字是动词，指逸散或是散去。例如 The smoke dissipated after the fire was put out， 火被扑灭后，烟就消散了。或是 The fog dissipated after the sun came out， 雾在太阳出来后就散了。最后我们看到动词 stall， 意思是使延后，进程暂停或是拖延。像是 Walt invented a long, complicated story to stall Mike and keep him from coming inside. Walt 想出了既长又复杂的故事来拖住 Mike， 不让他进入内部。也可以说 Since the developer's bankruptcy, construction on the skyscraper has been stalled. 自那位地产开发商破产后，摩天大楼的施工就遭到延宕了。另外，这个字也可以作为名词，指摊位或是摊子。举例来说 Kuala Lumpur has a lot of amazing food stalls selling Indian and Malaysian food. 吉隆坡有很多很棒的摊贩，贩售印度和马来西亚美食。或是 Anna opened a stall in the market to sell fresh fruit and vegetables from her farm. Anna 在市场开了一个摊子，来贩售她农场所种植的新鲜蔬果。
So now we've arrived at our concluding section in our talk about methane. We've looked at the good aspects of it, the bad aspects of it, and now we're going to talk about the future. So the good news is that while methane is a harmful greenhouse gas, it also dissipates fairly quickly. Now, to dissipate means to gradually disappear by becoming weaker and weaker. So methane dissipates quite quickly, which means it doesn't take a long time for it to disappear. Now, if I wanted to use the word dissipate in another context, I could also say that Tom was very angry for a moment, but his anger quickly dissipated, meaning his anger became weaker, died down, and he was no longer angry.
It kind of spread out, it was thin, and it was no longer a danger. You could say a storm dissipates, for example, the typhoon dissipated rather quickly after it passed over Taiwan, or after it passed over the central mountain range, it lost all its power and it dissipated. So the good news is that methane will dissipate quickly in the atmosphere, unlike carbon dioxide, which can stay in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So even though we pump a lot of methane into the atmosphere, it dissipates rather quickly, but if we keep pumping it up there, there's always going to be a certain amount of methane up in the air.
Right. So if we can reduce our methane emissions, we might just be able to stall the rapid warming of our planet. And this is something that a lot of people are trying to do, to stall the rapid warming of our planet. We do know that the planet is getting warmer and warmer, and we're looking for ways to stall this process. To stall means to make something or someone stay where they are, to not change, to not go further, so that we have more time to think of a solution. So this is something that we're trying to do. And if we can try to reduce our methane emissions, do things so that we don't emit so much methane, we don't create so much methane, then maybe we can try to stall or try to slow down the process of the warming planet.
Yeah, you might try to stall somebody because something hasn't happened yet and you don't want them to finish what they're doing to find out your secret or something. So you try to stall them by talking to them more and more so they won't find out. But in this particular case, we want to delay or stall rapid warming of our planet. With a little breathing room, we can focus on finding effective solutions for our longer-term climate problems. So we talked about things being in the short term, something that happens in a relatively small amount of time, and the opposite is the longer term, over a longer period of time. So yes, indeed, we need a little bit of breathing room, which could refer literally to space in a room. Maybe it's too crowded with people and the air is too stuffy and you can't breathe, so you need some breathing room. So you can find a bigger room or step outside and have a chance to breathe. But it also means having more time, maybe to make another decision, for example. Maybe your boss is putting you under a little pressure and you just can't make the decision. So you need a little breathing room. Give me a little time, boss. Give me another day and I'll do the project in a better way. So in this particular case, we're talking about having some more breathing room, a little more time to figure out what to do with this global warming problem. And then if we have that extra time, we can find those effective solutions, again, for our longer-term problems. And that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. Let's listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分的最后2句写道，目前全球每年的甲烷排放量是在5亿7千万公吨，尽管其中有大量的甲烷是在天然气开采和运送途中溢出的，但甲烷还有其他来源。好，课文是用补充单字 extraction， 它有这种开采或是萃取的意思。那它的动词是 extract， 那我们来学习它的字首字根。好，看到 tract 这个字根，它就有拉、吸引啊、移动或者是拖的意思，像你在后面加上 or 变成 tractor 就可以表达牵引机、拖拉机的意思哦。那么在 extract 这个字当中，它的字首 ex 表示向外， tract 有汲取、拔出的意思，那合在一起 extract 就是取出、拔出、萃取、截取出来的意思。好，我们顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 distract， 它的字首 dis 表示偏离， tract 表示拉力。同学们可以试着联想，把注意力拉走，把你的注意力从你原本专注的地方拉开来，应该就可以联想到说 distract 可以表达使分心、转移注意力的意思了。好，那第二个补充的是 attract。 好，它的字首 at 是来自 ad， 只是因为 ad 它碰到 t 开头的字根，然后拼成了 at。 好，这个字首它表示朝向，那么 tract 表示拉力。像我们看到这种很美或者很有趣的事物，它们就好像有拉力一样，会把你的注意力拉朝向它们嘛，这样应该就可以联想到 attract 它有吸引或是引起什么什么的注意的意思。那第三个补充的是 subtract， 它的字首 sub 表示分开， tract 表示抽，把东西分离，然后其中一部分把它抽走、拿走，这样应该可以联想到 subtract 它有扣除掉的意思。那 subtract 它就表示减去、减掉。好，另外文中它用到 a large amount of 来表达大量的什么。然后在课文第二部分的最后一句，它也说到 significant amounts of methane 来表达大量的甲烷。好，那这边我们来学习 amount 的相关用法。Amount 通常是用来表达不可数名词的量，像是时间啊、金钱、水等等。那它的用法就是 a 或 an 加形容词 amount of 加名词。那你也可以用形容词加上 amounts of 加名词。其中的形容词像你可以用 large, huge, great, small 等等去修饰它数量的多寡。例如 They spent an enormous amount of money on the wedding. 他们花了很多很多钱在婚礼上。好，那另外你也可以用到 any amount of something 来表达大量的某事物，它其实就相当于 a large amount of something 的意思。例如The organization has any amount of available resources. 那个组织拥有许多可以用的资源。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Annual. You have to pay a small annual fee to maintain your club membership. Transportation. Laura discovered that her furniture had been damaged during transportation. Livestock. Henry refused to leave his livestock behind during the flood. Gut. The human gut contains many bacteria that are beneficial to our health. Digestive. Terrence is suffering from some digestive problems and needs to lie down. Dissipate. The fog dissipated, revealing a winding road that stretched for miles. Stall. The workers' strike threatened to stall production, so the company agreed to their demands.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, can you think of any ways to combat methane emissions? What are they?
Well, as the article mentions, a significant amount of methane is released from factory farming or from raising cattle and raising livestock. So one way of reducing methane emissions would be to cut down on our meat intake, to eat less meat, less hamburgers, because that way we can reduce factory farming, and that would also reduce the amount of methane that is released in the air.
Well, to combat methane emissions from natural gas, maybe we can seek other energy solutions like nuclear or solar or wind power. Those forms of power may be a better solution to methane gas pollution. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.